All right, everyone. Thanks for joining. We have about 37 computers logged in so far, and I think we're going to have a few more. So we'll get started slowly and slowly bring people and give them a chance to sign on. I know it's lunch hour for all of us here on the West Coast. I know there's also people joining us from other places. So if you're coming from a meeting or something like that, welcome in. Just going to wait another minute. You can see I've put in this little impatient boy on the bottom. He's waiting for everybody to sign on. I'm hoping you can all hear me well enough. We did have a bit of a tech problem when we signed on earlier, so hopefully everybody is hearing me and I'm coming in loud and clear. And since it's 12:01, we might as well get started. I saw a couple more people just log on. So hello to everybody, and thank you for joining this month's BCMA webinar. It's presented in partnership with the Royal BC Museum and Archives. And we are on our webinar number 8, Digital Design on a Dime. My name is Ben Fast. I'm the Programs and Member Services Coordinator for the BC Museums Association, and I'll be the webinar's facilitator today. My email is right there as well. If anybody does have any tech problems, feel free to shoot me an email. I'm also in the chat window. I'm monitoring that, so if you do have any problems, feel free to jump on there and ask me a question. If you do have any questions about the chat window, you can find it by using the little black bar that should appear on your screen somewhere around the top or the side, maybe even the bottom of my PowerPoint slides. We can't hear you, so stop yelling if you have any questions. We can't see you either, so if you are in your PJs and drinking coffee, no problem with us. But what we want you to do is use the chat function, open it up, and click the All Panelists and Attendees button. If you send it to all panelists, it only goes to me and Ryan, so make sure you click it to everybody, and that way everybody can see their question. And I do know we have some people joining us from all across Canada, so maybe why don't we give that a quick test and let everybody know where you're signing in from. If you can give a chance, I'm going to sign in and I'm going to say I'm calling in from BC. We got some people from Creston and Vancouver, UBC, Regina. Welcome from the middle of Canada. Looks like people are starting to find it. This is great. White Rock, Edmonton, Aurora, Ontario, Soyuz, Fort Langley, even Botwood, Newfoundland. Saanich, not so far down the road from us. Richmond Hill, Ontario, Victoria, Seashelt, Vernon. This is great. So everybody looks like they're coming in. A lot of people are still doing all panelists, but you're getting most of it. All panelists and attendees is what you want to make sure you click it for. Now, if you are in full screen window as well and you can't find your chat window, it might appear on a black bar. You might need to press escape key to have the chat window appear. All right, so everybody seems to have gotten it. That's great. Lots of people signing on from all around. Yukon, Newfoundland, it's great. Now I wanted to highlight this map, just take a quick moment because this is something pretty cool for us here at the BCMA. When we started these webinars, we thought we'd only have people from BC sign on, and if you don't know where BC is, it's this one here on the left. And through webinars 1 through 7, you'll actually notice we got people from all the way across Canada, all the way through to Nova Scotia. Which signed on last month. But today we have a very special welcome from our first attendees from Newfoundland and Labrador and from the Yukon. So we are now officially all the way across to the Atlantic Ocean, and we're making our first inroads into the north. So we are coast to coast to coast on these webinars. And so welcome to everybody signing in from the Yukon and from Newfoundland and Labrador. Now, I had the opportunity, we're really happy. This is our celebration face. Thanks for joining us. I had the chance to live in the Yukon in Whitehorse last summer. It is a beautiful place. This is a Parks Canada site, the SS Klondike, up on the Yukon River. I would highly recommend it. And I have yet to be to Newfoundland, but I did meet Brad Gushu, Olympic gold medalist curler, so I feel like I'm pretty close to being from Newfoundland, or at least having been there. So anyways, let's go on to our real thing, the real reason we're here, which is the webinar. So we all love interactives within our museums and even the museums we visit. And we love it when they're fun, because when they're fun, we see people more engaged and learning, exploring our content. Now, most of us will have heard about or seen examples of amazing interactive displays like this 16 by 12 foot Smithsonian Air and Space Go Flight wall, or maybe the Cleveland Museum of Art's massive collections wall, which by the way is fully touch screen. And probably the most famous digital interactive in recent years is the Cooper Hewitt pen, which is a Smithsonian museum in New York. They use this pen. Visitors can go around and collect their favorite objects, and it also tracks their visits as well, so that they can re-engage online. They can see which areas they may have missed, see how their visit compared to everybody else's. But you have to ask yourself, how much does that cost? Well, $1 million, you say, that's probably a little low. It's more likely about $10 million. I was able to connect with the designer, and he said it was just under 10% of a $91 million refurbishment that they did at that Cooper Hewitt Museum. So when we hear these sorts of prices, it sort of makes us feel like this robot here. We get a little staggery and we fall over and we go, how the heck are we going to do something that's $10 million when we have a staff of 3? I just also love this GIF. It's just hilarious to watch this guy fall over one more time. There we go. Now, if we try to do it ourselves, in-house and without help, we end up a little bit like this guy. Not much budget, not much chance of success in the digital technology field. Poor guy. And that's why we decided to bring in our very own friend, Ryan Meech. Ryan Meech is at the Maritime Museum of BC right now. I love the way he described himself on his website. He's an interactive construction worker. It's a great way to think of digital design and digital elements of a museum. And he's actually originally from the other coast as well. He came to BC via Massachusetts. So we welcome Ryan here. That's his website as well. Feel free to check out his gear and his stuff. And Ryan holds a master's degree from the Center for Digital Media in Vancouver, where he now lives as well. So he has several projects on display at the Vancouver Maritime Museum, and is, as I said, currently working with the Maritime Museum of British Columbia, so definitely connected to a coast for Ryan. And he's producing several interactive displays for them right now. I'm going to throw things over to Ryan. He's going to share his screen and get started. So Ryan, why don't you go ahead and do that, and thanks for joining us.
All right. No, thank you. As soon as I figure out how to share my screen, Ben showed me. I just forgot. All right. How is that? Has everyone seen that?
Looks good to me, Ryan.
All right. Cool. So yeah, I guess as Ben said, I'm pleased and surprised to see as many people here as are. I was not expecting nearly as many people, and I certainly was not expecting, coast to coast action. So that's actually kind of exciting. I also am a little concerned that I don't have as much wisdom as 50 and 60 people deserve, but I'll do my best, and you can let me know. So I guess I will kick off basics of why we're here. I'm sure as with this many people, there'll be a lot of different motivations, no doubt, probably in some, not all museum people even, but in general, I think these are concerns that really nearly every museum has, no matter where they're from, which is a couple of needs. The first, you need to look modern, and especially to attract more families and kids. Even if you have an overwhelming number of kids coming in, you always need more. And then, more importantly, you don't have a lot of money to do these things. And I know that is true, really, no matter how much money you have. Like, with the thing you want to build always costs twice as much as you have. Even if what you have is that $1 million, you'll just want a $2 million thing. So those are pretty widely shared challenges, I think. And then, meanwhile, sort of in the face of those challenges, I have been quite fortunate to have spent the last couple of years trying to figure out how to build cool stuff for museums for cheap. I think that's kind of a unique situation, which is one reason why I was so excited to host this webinar, because I know that is not common. Like, I know that I don't fit under ongoing museum budgets, to pay such a construction worker. It takes some special circumstances, like a big exhibition or whatnot. In my case, I got involved first through student projects. So, that just special circumstances like that. While I would love if someone, and any one of you, wants to hire me full-time, great. After my engagement with Maritime Museum of British Columbia ends. So in general, I know that what I've got going on is a little unique. And so I want some of the things I've learned not to get lost, basically. So in some cases, this may look like it's just random spitballs being thrown against the wall. To a little degree, that is true. I didn't want to leave anything out that I thought was cool and that, could be passed on, without getting lost. So the three projects that I've been building, the outer end ones that you see here are at Vancouver Maritime Museum. First, we did a ship simulator that gives users an idea of what it's like to navigate through the Northwest Passage. If you've been in the Vancouver Maritime Museum, their signature artifact is a ship called the St. Roch, which is the second ship ever to go through the Northwest Passage. So this sits at the base of it, and it's trying to be as faithful a recreation as possible to what that was like to sail through the Northwest Passage. And the second one in the middle you see there is a touchscreen display that's the big thing I'm developing now with the Maritime Museum of British Columbia for an exhibit about the SS Princess Sophia, a ship that sank 100 years ago next year. And so that one, it's a touchscreen display where you can explore the interior and exterior of a notable vessel. You can touch it, move it around, zoom in on it, that sort of thing. Open it up to a cross section of the interior so you can see what was happening on the inside. So that's the big one that I'm working on currently, not quite done. And the last one you see here, also at the Vancouver Maritime Museum, is an interactive underwater treasure hunt. This one is most overtly for kids. The others can apply to anybody. Kids will like the most, but anyone can use them. This one is just flat out designed for kids. And the idea here is we put them in a CG scene, like a computerized scene that's projected onto walls all around them. And then they have a digital, quote unquote, flashlight. It's not real light, but based on where you point the light, the computerized scene illuminates. So it's darkness underwater, and the kids can point this light around to explore the scene. I think actually that's the coolest of them, and the most innovative, but I'll go on in a little while to describe how that cuts both ways. So anyway, I just give that summary because these are the three coolest things I've done, and I will be referring to them a number of times for various reasons. And I can say also, where the purpose of this talk is around how to build things inexpensively. It is true, especially the two on the outside, the ship simulator and the underwater thing. Most people would not call those affordable in absolute terms. You're talking about tens of thousands still, but I absolutely know that is the mere fraction of the cost that it would cost if you were to engage a more professional design shop. And so for what they are, these are extremely affordable, just a fraction of the price. So hopefully that's a good enough intro, and you see where I'm coming from. And those are the projects I'll be referring to. So first thing, the thing with kids, that's kind of who I think I am serving. When I build things, I hope that everyone likes them, but I'm thinking mostly of kids. And a few things that we know about kids. I know museum professionals spend a good part of their lives making this not true, or trying their hardest to make it not true, but it's still true to a degree that kids are bored when they are in a museum. From their perspective, a lot of times it's just a bunch of dusty old artifacts, and they are looking for something, anything that catches their attention. And so this is actually one of the biggest opportunities we have for digital installations. You can show kids something that attracts them instantly, and it's shiny, and things are spinning around, flashing lights and whatnot. And we hope, and I have seen in practice, that I can attract kids and totally distract them from anything else that they liked a lot less. But then, most importantly, and I'll keep referring to this throughout the presentation as well, kids don't care to a good degree. And what I mean about that is kids, in a way that adults aren't, tend to be extremely forgiving. So if you make something really cool without a huge budget, so it lacks some of the polish that you might see if you had the $1 million, kids don't care about that at all. I've never heard a kid talk about what an installation is not. They tend to be very excited for what it is. So it takes a bit of the pressure off. You can focus on building stuff that's really awesome without necessarily worrying, about, is this exactly good enough? Is this is this as good as the $1 million idea? It doesn't necessarily have to be, because kids don't care. The big story is, while I'm looking at these things, I'll often engage with people's parents or kids' parents while the kids are playing, and very frequently the parents will, in a positive way, point out that there are other and frankly better ship simulators in the world. Just to be helpful, just make sure that I know what's out there, that sort of thing. And it is, and I don't take offense certainly, but that's something that adults do and kids never do. I've never had a kid say, "Hey, there's something really cool over at BCIT," but adults frequently mention that there is something really cool at BCIT. So kids tend to like what they have, what an installation is, not what it isn't. So that gives us an awful lot of wiggle room, I have found, which is a good thing. So then on the flip side, though, where we don't get as much wiggle room, I'm sure everyone, no matter what your museum subject matter is, will recognize someone like this. For my purposes, I'm calling them rivet counters. They are absolutely not forgiving. They will. I call them a rivet counter because someone will come up and say something ridiculous like, "I noticed your 3D model here has 97 rivets on the starboard side hull. I know factually that there are only 57 rivets. This is an inaccurate abomination." I realize that those people are important to the museum ecosystem in a lot of ways, but I am considering them kind of to be an enemy of awesome. If my main goal is to build cool things for kids, I cannot listen to these people. I would rather say, and I'm afraid to do so, please do not complain. I can, if you give me $10,000, I can put exactly as many rivets as you'd like. Typically, they would not be willing to do that. So I would say, at least for the purposes of digital design, if not for the rest of your operations, they can be ignored and should be ignored. Otherwise, you'll spend all your time and money focusing on things that frankly aren't important, that don't engage children. They are important in an academic sense, but certainly not for the purposes that we have here. And I like the biggest story I have to illustrate this is when we were doing the ship simulator. We tried really hard to figure out what speed the ship should move at. We really wanted it to be 100% accurate at the time. And so we played with that, but the St. Roch's journey through the Northwest Passage, the famous one, took over 2 years. So it wasn't exactly a blistering pace. So we recognized pretty quickly that that was not producing the most exciting experience. It didn't resemble video games enough. So we were sure that kids just simply wouldn't enjoy it. But of course, that is gross inaccuracy that only certain people will notice, but those people will tend to be pretty vocal about. So the joke there was the director at the time of the Vancouver Maritime Museum would say, "Well, to the complainers, this is the North Pole, so everything from here is downhill. So that's why it's moving extra fast, because it's just inertia." So I tried to disarm them or ignore them, but
Ryan, we lost you. Just everybody hold on 1 second.
or anything, I definitely want to produce as great and as professional looking and as high quality a thing as possible. However, I have noted that especially when money is an object, high standards can tend to get in the way a little bit. If you are telling a compelling story and you don't have a lot of money, you kind of have an arm tied behind your back. So the idea of having to spend an awful lot of the rest of your time making it as super historically accurate as the museum generally demands can be kind of difficult.
Hey, Ryan.
Yep.
Sorry to interrupt. We just lost you for a couple seconds there. Can you go back about 1 minute just to the end of the last slide and move forward from there? Sorry about that.
Okay. Sorry. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you. Yeah. It just was the internet connection, I think. Sorry.
Okay. So I don't know what you got of my rivet counter complaints, but I was pointing out that these people, the people who are overly concerned with accuracy, when you're trying to do something to attract children, they can be the enemy of what you're trying to do. Their goals do not overlap very well with my goals. So I try to ignore them as much as possible. And the funny story there that I had, and I'm not sure who caught this, but the people would come up and make comments on the speed the ship was moving and the ship simulator that we built. We spent a ton of time trying to figure out what that speed should be. We wanted originally to make it as accurate as possible to how the ship actually moved, but it was an incredibly slow journey, and the ship moved incredibly slowly, less than walking speed at times. So we weren't really able to do that. We discovered immediately that it was just too slow and too boring, and kids would not like it because it didn't look enough like a video game. So we kind of had to extend ourselves. We had to take a little creative license. So if anyone did mention it, the director of the Vancouver Maritime Museum at the time, Ken Burton, would say to them something like, well, we're in the North Pole and everything's downhill from here. So that's why it seems to be moving faster. It's just inertia, right? So if you can't ignore them completely, you can at least kind of try and disarm them a little bit. Which brings me, I don't want some of the things I say, about cost effective and about, ignoring accuracy and things like that. I do not mean that to, I don't want that to mean that, you should have low standards or that inaccuracy is not important, or, you can just be really cavalier. I recognize it. For educational institutions, you've got to do your best there. However, especially when it comes to creating a engaging digital installation for kids, if that is your primary goal, certain standards can get in the way of that a little bit. So while I don't advocate, inaccuracy, creative license, I think, is important here, more so than it might be in other parts of your museum. Just need a little bit of wiggle room. If total accuracy is less compelling to children than a little creative license, well, to me, the argument there is pretty easy. So like in the underwater treasure hunt thing, none of our sea life is actually polar. It's meant to be an Arctic environment, but the gray Arctic char and some of the duller sea life there just wasn't going to work out. Was not going to be as attractive to kids or anybody really. So we just absolutely needed to take the creative license. They're much more, the sea life is actually tropical, even though we are asserting that it is in the North Pole, just because the experience is infinitely more compelling the way we did it than if we were to try and pay absolute respect to the truth. So in general, to sum that up, the first goal, as I see it, is to pull in and engage children. And then once you've got them, then you can put them through the long, boring version of the truth. But point is, you've got to grab them. And if, whatever it takes to do so, I'm willing to do. So having said all the cool things that some of the cool things that digital can do, why we want it, and why some of the constraints aren't as scary as they might seem, the question is now, who can help me, knowing that, people don't have resources on staff that can do this, and hiring professional design shops. There's a couple here in Vancouver that are really cool, but they're also extremely expensive. You're talking $100,000, $200,000 minimum. So with them off the table, who can help? And the easiest example, some of this coming from my own experience, is students and early career folks. Now, I know that there's a very long conversation in the museum world about not taking advantage of students, and I definitely don't want to contradict any of that or say anything in opposition, but I would say that I think in this particular segment, there's a little more wiggle room there, some give and take. There's a big difference in my mind between taking advantage of students and, hey, take advantage of students, just a tone of voice, see how easy that was. Especially here in the visual arts and media worlds, you absolutely need portfolio pieces. It's a different scenario, I think, to internships looking for something to do for the summer, because that experience is not mandatory, whereas people producing visual things must have portfolio pieces. And at certain cases, in a certain point in my career, I'd pay you to let me develop something for your museum and host it there live, because having a live, real life portfolio piece is invaluable. So um, in a case like this, what we're talking about, make no mistake, if you incorporate student help, it is not that you are not compensating them. You are absolutely compensating them in some way that is more valuable than cash. Um, the idea of a live museum portfolio piece is arguably worth more than money. So while I certainly don't advocate, the bad kind of taking advantage of students, just be aware that there are some give and take items here. I think we have a little bit more wiggle room to use help that is willing and able to help us, but cost effectively. So there's tons and a surprising amount of educational programs going on that cover topics of interest to us. I come from Center for Digital Media, which is a pretty broad-ranging grad program that has lots of different skill sets, animators, game design people, and some museum installation folks, and lots of different skill sets. So they will work with museums or other businesses to make a student project out of things. So that's something worth considering. But then the stuff that I know a little less about, but I'm surprised to see this level of diversity. You might, for example, see 3D animation programs at a surprising number of institutions, like Emily Carr University here in Vancouver. Talks about the art aspect of that. Meanwhile, BCIT in the Vancouver area is talking about the technical end of that. And then Vancouver Film School offers a program in animation also. It's just talking more generally. So there's an awful lot of angles, and there's a ton of different programs at a ton of different institutions that would be a decent source of labor. And there's a couple of useful things there too. I've noticed, trying to solicit, not funds so much, but trying to solicit equipment and things. I have had great luck describing projects as a community collaboration. It's a student project for a nonprofit museum, things like that. It comes really easily off the tongue, and I think that people are doubly as receptive to a student project at a nonprofit museum because it's kind of a 1-2 punch. So that has been my experience. Hopefully others find the same. But then the biggest source of labor help that I have found with any of my projects are video game developers. Here we go. First of all, there are a ton of these people, in particular in BC, and largely in Vancouver area, but in Victoria as well. And they, as it turns out, they have a spectacular skill set for interactive displays. Almost none of them know it, but the way they can, pretty adaptable. They're good programmers. They'll know something about art. More importantly, they'll have a very finely honed sense of interactivity, or the good ones anyway. Part of their thing is to make people interact with what they're making, which is also true of museum installations. So without knowing it, those guys are actually great fits for museum projects. And they are often ready and willing because a lot of them will tend to be a little underemployed, honestly, because they're trying to live their dream. So they may be very receptive to projects that are similar to what they want to do, but actually pay money. So they may be quite excited if you find the right good game developer. You might be quite excited to help out. And so as for where to find them, it can be a little trickier, but they tend to congregate, which is good. There is an organization called Full Indie here in Vancouver, and all these guys meet up at some public place, restaurant or whatever, and just talk and have drinks. Show up and find somebody who looks like they're poor, and maybe they're just drinking water or something, but buy them a drink and make them an offer. And then there's a couple in Victoria I've noted. There's a developer association called IGDA, which has regular meetups and a Facebook group that you could check out. And then University of Victoria has a game development club, which is similar. They'll meet up. They have Facebook groups. So if you look around, you can find these people. Some of them will be, I admit, a little bit surly. They'll say, that is a compromise of my art. I don't want to do things for commercial purposes or whatever. That's a risk, but certainly I have had excellent luck and love using video game developers for everything that I can.
I'll just cut in and say that M. Gardner joined in on chat and said that Sheridan College in Oakville, Ontario is home to the largest animation and game design school as well. So for people from the East,
Sweet,
check out Sheridan College.
sweet. I'm writing that down too. Cool. All right. So that's how you're going to get it built. But then the one thing that I know the least about, but still want to share what I do know, which is the actual fundraising part of it. I'm building it, but I am lucky enough not to have to find the money usually. But nevertheless, I found a couple of things that I think are worth passing on, or at least are funny stories. And so if you're looking for money, the easiest that I can imagine is finding another institution that wants the same thing and build it collaboratively, basically get the money from someone else. That's kind of easy for me to say since I've worked with two maritime museums. The overlap there is obviously tremendous. So that's a lot easier for me. But does not necessarily have to be the case. For example, that ship simulator we built, because that ship was an RCMP vessel, even the RCMP Museum in Regina was interested in that. So, an entirely different organization with a completely different focus, but you find common ground, and if you can get some money from others to help you build something and share it, that can be great. And then the next one surprised me. Just simply asking for hardware donations. We just looked ahead to what we were going to need to display these projects. So not money, but the computers. In most cases with 3D in particular, heavy-duty graphics cards and good, expensive computers. So we figured out in advance what is it that we're going to need, and just simply found a vendor that built it and just asked them and gave them that 1-2 punch. We're a student project and it's for a nonprofit museum. And they said, okay, well, we just had a new model come out. So here are the testers for the old model that we have kicking around. So they gave us like $10,000 worth of computing, which was just incredible, out of nowhere, just by thinking not in terms of money, but thinking in advance. So how am I going to display this project, and who would want their name associated with it? So, who's making the computers, who's making the screen, or what have you. Those people, if asked nicely and you get lucky, might just help you in ways other than money. And then my favorite is I've seen what appears to me to be sort of slow playing donors. I'll talk a little bit about how in a little while about how I and many people design iteratively. Well, I'll tell later what that means, but the short version is it means we have a bunch of different stages that we can show. We add a new feature, I can create a new version of the game and show it to everybody. Or we upgrade the visuals, great, let's create a new version and show it to everybody. That kind of iterative growth is an opportunity to kind of slow play donors, which, if you're not familiar with that term, that comes from poker. It means basically extracting maximum money out of people, in some cases by trickery, maybe not this one, but you just keep showing them different stages of design and it can get more and more exciting. And then once it's almost there, say something like, geez, we just need a little bit more money to push us over the edge with this, because they have watched the whole process and watched it grow. I think they are a little bit more receptive to dipping back into the pocket in a way that I think absolutely being able to show the iterative development of a project is invaluable and makes possible in ways that it wouldn't be for other projects. So you can let me know if that works. I don't know, but it worked from what I could see. And the last one, it's just kind of funny, but it really this is entirely funny. But Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, if that's something you're not familiar with, it's basically fake money that you use on the internet, largely for nefarious purposes. But why it has become really common is people just buy and sell it just as a trading implement, almost like an investment. But where it comes from is computers mine it. You just give them some of your computing power. They use it to, conduct great big calculations, and you get a small amount of this fake currency in return. But I learned recently that the kind of computers that are really good for 3D, heavy on graphics card are actually the ideal cryptocurrency miners. And more importantly, they're off 16 hours a day. The museum closes and these things sit idle. Theoretically, you could be producing cryptocurrencies with your own unused computing time if you're got the kind of equipment that I have purchased. So far, a lukewarm response to that, but that's an idea whose time is coming. I'm certain of it. And then just to touch back on partnerships, how you can work with others. One thing I've noted is, if you want it, others probably do too. If nothing else, that there's probably a museum of a similar focus, or a focus that overlaps well with yours. There's got to be somewhere in most or anyway some cases. There's got to be another institution that wants what you're buying somewhere, and so it's just a question of finding them. But then, as I am told, take it to be true that grants are easier to come by if there's multiple institutions applying. As I say, fundraising isn't my bag, so I won't make any huge claims there, but many people have suggested that is true. So if you can find a partner to go and do it with, it might be a little easier. And the one that I am becoming ever more interested in is the idea of building something and then adapting it for cash, and selling it, finding someone else who needs it, who came along late. Maybe you didn't have them as a quote unquote partner, but they have use for it. Well, once we have done the hard part, which is the tech, reproducing it is much easier and can be done much less expensive than the original. So if for example, if anyone sees anything they like, just wait by your phone. Maybe I'll call you up and see if you want a version. So that is an opportunity. It's a little harder to capitalize on because you've got to figure out how to sell in addition to build. But that is, as I'm starting to think of it, that's actually one of the prime opportunities for getting funding that I can see for projects that I build. And then the key to all of it is to build things that are just broadly useful. Just step back a little bit. You're trying to tell a story that is important to your institution, but just step back a little bit and think about how other people might tell a similar story, or other stories you might have in your own institution that you can use once you develop this technology or this platform or this installation. What else can you do with it? So think of things that are broadly useful in the world, but then also to your own institution, you'll get a lot more bang out of the buck. And then, where does one get ideas? And especially when you are attempting to do things cost effectively, the easiest and cheapest way to get an idea for a display is to steal it from others, or at least a kernel. To begin with, you're probably going to be stealing ideas from the $1 million things that Ben was showing. So merely trying to take a really great idea and make it cheaper definitely counts as putting your own spin on something. So just finding something as inspiration, figuring out how to do it an awful lot cheaper, or as closely as possible. That I sort of tongue-in-cheek saying steal. I would not say that is stealing. You're doing enough to put your own spin on it. But then, in any case, do people go to both places anyway? Unless you are copying or using as inspiration the most famous and crazy installations. In all likelihood, people will not see both things. But most importantly, as I said earlier, kids don't care. If you have something that is kind of similar to something they've seen elsewhere, they're not going to mind. Kids will like it, will like what's in front of them, and not think about whether you're overlapping with others. So, wholeheartedly recommend stealing or using as inspiration, to put it better. And then just to give some ideas, this is things I've been thinking about a lot, but also that people ask me about most frequently whenever we're talking about anything display and museum. So there are some things that come up a lot that are just, you need to use great caution when thinking about. Virtual reality in particular has become a super hot topic, and usually it's the first word that comes out of anyone's mouth when I'm talking to them about projects that I'm building. It's a little dangerous for museums for couple of reasons. The main one that I think philosophically is it's very solitary. I believe that museums and good interactive displays should be kind of community, should be able to enjoy them, but multiple people, and it should be watchable in a way that virtual reality isn't always. And I'm also sure that the goal of your institution is not to make people look dopey in goggles, but that tends to be the main attraction to VR for everyone who's watching. So I don't know, it's fun, but it might not be quite the message that we're trying to convey. But most importantly, why VR is dangerous, especially if you are trying to do it cheaply, is you can make people sick. Virtual reality, it demands very detailed environment in which, it demands a very detailed reality, and that is very expensive to produce. And if you try to do it cheaply, maybe you'll get lucky, but probably it'll look cheap. And cheap virtual reality hopefully you've not experienced it, but it can make you nauseous. Your eyes immediately detect that something's not quite right, and you can even get people physically sick if it's bad enough. So despite how hot a topic it is, virtual reality, I just do not like it for museums, and you should use great caution. And then the other one is just producing flat out games. Even having said that game developers are our guys, I think it is important to avoid putting something that is a game from start to finish in the museum. A little distracting, I think, and then it tends to make a bottleneck at the installation. If you're lucky enough to have a whole pile of kids all at once, if it's a 10-minute game, not as many of them can enjoy it, and it distracts a little bit from the message that you're trying to convey as well. So there are some ways around that which we can talk about, but I try not to build and try to discourage just building a flat out game. A game-like experience is a better bet. And then the last one is custom hardware, which is true especially of the underwater treasure hunt project that I built. We had to develop the hardware. The flashlight is built out of a gyroscope. We had to develop that ourselves, which meant there's no support, there's no one to call. We have to figure everything out, and we have a little bit of a durability challenge here. Everyone thinks it's worth it because kids love it so much, but it's not necessarily something I would do again. And I would, suggest caution. If you're building something that's never existed before, you can create problems for yourself. So, especially if you have, little time or resources. So it's actually just another reason why, using other ideas as inspiration is helpful. And then better bets for all of these things. First of all, virtual reality's, slightly less well-known cousin is augmented reality, which you'll recognize from something like Pokemon Go was an example of this. It sort of superimposes computer stuff over the real world. I think that actually has a lot greater chance of producing a great museum exhibit. And then while no heavy gamification, like a light, repeatable game experience, I think is very advisable. So everything that I've developed resembles a game in some way. You don't sit down; it doesn't have scores, it doesn't have a timer, but it's something light that presents a challenge and is repeatable, but without being a flat-out game. And then obviously the counterpart to or the opposite of custom hardware is proven technology. So, for example, in the ship simulator, it uses this rotary motion detector that is just built and it exists. So it is able to power the wheel and control the exhibit, and we didn't have to design it, and it just works great, and it's never caused a problem. So just be very cautious about custom, because things off the shelf can just be a lot easier and cheaper to handle. And then a little bit more about that gamification concept. I guess maybe that is a term that is hotter in digital media circles. So if you're not familiar with it, basically it is a term for making something fun out of something not. So take whatever it is, some mundane activity or day-to-day thing, and put a challenge around it. And suddenly you've gamified that activity. And absolutely that applies to interactive museum pieces. So heavy gamification, we talked about scores, timers, longer playing time, complex strategies. that's a little heavy, I think, for a museum. Whereas, light gamification is what I'm talking about, which is repeatable. Very few instructions are required, which is key if you don't have anyone monitoring, for example, and then just simple actions. And then I think I got to move a little faster here, so pardon me if I start to go too quick, and hopefully someone will pipe up itself. But this one is what I'm calling adapt or die, and this is, I kind of hinted at this, but trying to build things that are expandable and then adaptable, both for other institutions and for your own. So this is a screenshot of the opening or the idle state of the 3D model exploration we have, the Princess Sophia. And what you'll note is on the left, this was built and designed and built to be expandable to other vessels for other institutions. So we've already got Vancouver Maritime Museum's St. Roch in there as a secondary vessel. But the beauty is, as many people as we could sell this to, we can just keep adding vessels. And then on the other half of it, on the right side, we're not just trying to tell stories. No, we are. I'm envisioning this as a storytelling platform. So here are 3 stories that we have loaded up that show you about the interior or exterior of the ship. But I could go over there right now, and in a period of 20 minutes, entirely new content. We would just, drag little touchable hotspots around, rewrite some text, and it would become a whole new experience in a half an hour, which is, I hope that what we're building will be up for years. But in the event that it is not, this platform can be used by this institution again and again for a variety of different stories. And here's one I don't want to miss. So this is Designing in Layers is the title, but it's covered by this video. So I'll just let this video go while I am talking. So this is the underwater exploration, and this is an example of having built different layers for different people and different ages. So there was our animated bear, who's acts like our MC, and everyone can watch him. And what we see here is a sort of youngish kid. He's not maybe playing the treasure hunt so much, but he's still able to interact with the environment. Maybe the treasure hunt is a little rich for his abilities, but he's still able to make a fish swim away or make this starfish spin just by spinning the light at it. So he's got something really cool to do, even if he's not able to do the full gamified version. Older kids will come in and love the gamified piece. But then, so different kids, but meanwhile, we have attempted to make the visuals compelling enough that this is great for spectators. So the parents, at least, but then even people walking by get something out of this because we put a layer into it and made it visible to even passersby, give them something to do. Skip ahead a little here. Here we go. Here comes the good part. Now we've got three people in there, all enjoying the thing in their own way. You'll get multiple people. If you get a group of kids in there, a school trip or something, they'll all do the treasure hunt collaboratively, and it creates this terrific bunch of noise, but it's just so gratifying to see. So that's groups. And then lastly, the very youngest kids who can't even really understand the flashlights still like to watch the interactivity. And then more importantly, this is the favorite part of little kids. Those little eyes in a barrel. One is left to wonder what is in there. Of course, the answer is nothing, but the littlest kids just eat that up. And I've even seen a little girl in tears because she dragged her mother back to see the eyes. And we were repairing it that day, so she wasn't able to. So just even a silly touch just to appeal a little bit to another age group or something. If you can figure out how to wedge that in, that will make your thing all the more attractive to all the more visitors. And then the other one that I'm liking lately is sort of development almost as an exhibit. What I've seen as I'm in the museum building things is people just love to watch, and they love to come up and talk. They enjoy just the idea that someone is building something in front of them. So I like to think that those people definitely want to come back to see it when it's in a finished state. So hopefully you're creating the excitement to generate repeat visits. But then also, I feel like it must be easier to raise money if you're showing people what their donations are doing in real time. And it's not a theoretical, it's not something they'll see if we have money to develop. We are developing right in front of their very eyes. So, hey, why don't you give me $100? Hopefully that works. Try it out. Let me know. And then just for the developer in me, building a live environment like in the museum is a gift, like an invaluable one. Just to watch people using something in the wild gets you a much better sense of what you did right and wrong, things you need to fix in a way that, your colleagues or, my folks who are in the same industry as me are usually not very good test subjects because they have their own motivations. Watching real people, real visitors, is invaluable, and actually developing it live in the museum is the way to do that, and that is spectacular stuff. And then I've touched a little bit on iterative design, which I don't know, it probably just means what it says, but as I'm thinking of it, it just comes in 4 easy steps. The first is you just build a working prototype as soon as is possible. Just throw it together. If you're using placeholders, great. If you are just buying pre-made materials that maybe aren't right to your subject and you want to replace, just throw it in there. And then once you have that working prototype, just always fix the worst remaining thing. And this all makes it cheaper. And then, well, I missed a step. And you pivot to less resistance. If something proves difficult or proves more expensive than you thought, or you can't figure out how to solve a challenge or something, it may be easier and cheaper to just pivot to less resistance. There's a lot of cool things you can build and a lot of cool features you can add to your projects. So getting hung up on one tends to make cost overruns, because if you feel like you need to develop this or that feature, you have to just keep throwing money at it till it's solved. Or if you're having someone else build things, they will tend to they may overinflate the importance of one detail or another. That it might be easier to just ignore if this thing is costing too much time or energy. But then the one trouble with it is you've got to figure out when to stop. You can just keep adding iterations forever, and I do. Even projects that are live and theoretically completed, I'm always still trying to find another tweak, or I'll see someone use it in a way that I didn't expect, and try to fix that. So the development goes forever. You do, though, need to figure out when to stop, and usually that's when you run out of time or money. But if you're organized, it can be sooner. And sorry, so I got, this is sort of like the spitballs that I was worried about at the start that I mentioned. I just want to make sure I get all these bullet points out. So I hate that there's so much text on the slide, but bear with me. The first, good theater. I touched on this a little bit, but everything I build, I try to make it as visible to passersby as possible, which means, things on a touch screen should never be on a tablet in my mind because they're just too small and no one but the user playing it can see it. So great big screens, or whatever you're building, make sure the back is open so people walking by can see. Or when kids are involved, that's how their parents will interact with it, standing back a few paces. So make sure that there's viewability, I guess is the watchword there, for things that you're designing to make them more exciting to more people. Even those who don't play, adults in particular, I'll find, will be strangely hesitant to touch things. They'd just rather walk away because, I don't know, I don't understand those computers or whatever. So there'll be a lot of people who, for whatever reason, will not engage interactively. So at least giving them something to watch is huge. And then the next one, don't just reproduce your walls. And by this, I mean, digital interactive can do a ton of things, but if you are using time and energy to basically put photos and accompanying text in an interactive wrapper, that may not be the best bet. You already have places to display images with little labels that tell what they are, and those are much cheaper than an interactive display. So I would say, if it should stay on the walls, leave it on the walls, and demand bigger things out of digital than just spitting facts at people. Demand better things from exhibits than I demanded from the slide. So, and then the next one is edit and edit and edit and re-edit text. This is true in life, and it's true in those wall labels to be sure, but especially in digital. The less text you have, the better. There's a lot else going on that people don't have nearly as much patience to sit and read as they would if they were just standing by a wall. So it is hugely important to keep text absolutely minimal to get the point across. And then just generally, I have found a 2 or 3 minute length to be pretty much optimal for most things. It's a time that lets people feel like they're getting their money's worth, quote unquote, but also keeps people moving so that you're not bottlenecking the thing forever. And then screensavers. I keep seeing this as I go to other museums. A lot of people seem concerned about not wearing out the screen, so they put on screensavers like you would in your home computer to make sure that the borders don't burn in and things like that. But as I am seeing this, interactive displays should be like a magnet for children. They have things that are shiny, spinning around, flashing lights, all these other things. So to cover that up with something in order to save a screen is just a travesty to me. Be ready to buy a new screen if that's what it takes to attract children and just pull them in like a magnet. It can be that good, so let it. And then the last one, include fail safes. And this is huge, especially if you don't have people monitoring all parts of your museum at all times. If something goes wrong with the display, it can backfire. If you have something up that is broken all day long and everyone comes up and sees it broken and you don't notice it, to reset it or whatever you have to do, that is obviously horrendous and you'd almost rather have nothing at all. So we tend to try to design in fail safes. So, something that will reset the program for no reason. So, every 30 seconds or a minute of idle, it'll just restart itself. So if something broke and that visitor walked away, hopefully by the time the next visitor walks up, the whole thing has reset itself on purpose. And then we'll even put in resets for things that should never come up. Like in the ship simulator, and an embarrassing irony is when the ship gets stuck in ice. That should never have happened. Somehow it does every once in a while. So we had to put in a fail-safe that if the ship ceases to move forward, even though that should never happen, we put it in anyway, reset the program. So just as many fail-safes as you can think of, even if they're useless or appear to be, if they reset your thing once and keep a visitor from seeing a broken display, whatever it is, it's worth it. And then the last thing I can comment on, I think usefully, is equipment. And Ben will send around, I put together kind of a buying guide, not meant to be comprehensive, but if I've seen something or work with something that is cool or right for museums, or I know is durable enough for museums or something, it's in there so you can see what it is and what I like about it. But just generally, the big ones, the most high level is iPad, Android. If people are talking about tablets for various reasons, some are appropriate. They tend to say iPad when they mean tablet, and often that's okay because iPads tend to be the most durable, but they're also the most expensive. So, an Android tablet like the Samsung Galaxy line, for example, is usually a bit cheaper, and especially if you anticipate having to replace these after a couple of years or whatever, buying two $600 tablets versus buying two $1,200 iPads, it starts to add up. So be aware that there are things other than iPads that work nearly as well. And I give some rankings of tablets in that buyer's guide as well, so you can see what might be the best or the worst, what you should avoid. And then the big one, I've seen nothing more adaptable than a touch screen or touch table, depending on which way it's oriented. And for digital interactive, that's almost like a base level. It's like water. You can develop any number of things on that one piece of hardware. So it's very versatile. But a lot of people are afraid of them because they can tend to be really expensive if you get something designed specifically for a museum, specifically from a supplier building all-in-one touch units. but you can actually assemble them in parts for surprising cost effectiveness. They'll make, instead of having it built into the screen, people make like an overlay you can put on top of a TV. So now you've got a TV that you just bought at the Best Buy for $300, and you've got a thing to overlay it for $600 or $800 maybe. I know that's a lot of money, but versus a $3,000 or $5,000 larger all-in-one unit produced for the purpose, that's a steal, and it gives you a platform on which to design as many things as you can think of. So I wholeheartedly recommend that, and there are no cost barriers if you're willing to build it in parts. You might lose a little bit of durability there, but you could buy these 3 times before you could buy a more robust all-in-one solution. So I tend not to even worry about the durability. And then this one is cool and should be loved by everybody, but what I was selling earlier, the idea of treating the development of the stuff like a video game design, it turns out that game software is also well equipped to handle interactive display design. But one extra benefit of it is one of the reasons why these pieces of software were created in the first place was to be able to port a game to multiple platforms. So if you build a display, take my 3D model experience, for example, you develop that, it sits on the museum floor because it was produced for that. I could actually also, with almost no effort, produce it as a smartphone app that users could download with almost no effort. We could reformat it and put it on the web, so people from a million miles away can play the same thing without ever visiting your museum. There's tons of different uses and a ton of different platforms, and they can be very hard and expensive to build for if you're doing them a la carte. But if you're building in game software, those things are just touch a button and it's an app. Touch a button, it's on the web. So that gives you an awful lot of power to get a ton of bang for your buck. And the last one, probably I covered this more than enough earlier, but innovation in terms of equipment that you're using cuts both ways. It can be really cool to have something totally novel and unique that no one has ever seen in the entire world. But if that means that there's going to be maintenance that you don't really have the time or money for, or if it means that it might have a little lower durability, it might not work, it is definitely to be careful of. I would rather, and I think most of you would agree, would rather have something that works and works great without a ton of oversight than something that is new and novel and something that no one has ever seen before. Cost is a factor there too. Innovation can be often expensive. It's got a lot of trial and error and some other things. So got to be aware that equipment and materials, if you get new and untested stuff, it can cut both ways. It's cool, but a little dangerous. So just to be aware. That was it. That was my series of spitballs. If you have any ideas that I missed, feel free to hit me up with them. That would be great. But otherwise, I hope that at least gives a rough overview of what you're in for and why some of what appears to be a challenge maybe is easier to overcome than you imagine. Some other tips that could help you find people who can build things for you or give you a way if you're daring enough to be a producer on your own, some different ways you can think about it, different things to keep in mind. So I hope people have found this useful, and I hope it's at least useful enough for the number of people that signed up. But anyway, that is it. Hopefully there's a question or two which Ben can let me know about.
Yeah, so thanks, Ryan. We will move on to a time for questions. So I've just put this up just to remind you about how you can ask your questions. If you send them in through the chat window, then that way I can read them out loud and make sure that everybody gets them. So we are just past 1 o'clock, so if people are leaving, that's fine. But we can definitely answer about 5 or 10 minutes worth if you're willing to stick around. So we have a question: what was the cost of the underwater display? If you're willing to share that, Ryan.
I probably can. Yeah, sure. It was about 20,000. That included the hardware, the projectors, and all that, and the computer. And for a display of that size in 3D, it needed very expensive graphics card. Oh, I'm sorry. I said that was donated, which is true. So that was actually the theoretical cost. A huge chunk of the technology was donated, so we didn't have to pay it. But in theory, that was something like $20,000.
Okay, cool. If anybody else has any questions, feel free to jump in the chat window there. I see there's still about 40 people still signed on, so if any of those 40 have any questions, I'd be curious to know how many of these museums that signed on are interested in doing this sort of work or have that on the books already. So here's a question: what's your view on refurbished equipment? A good deal or too prone to problems?
Depends on what it is. I have been burned by buying a tablet that was older. We'll call it used and refurbished, which would be a nice way to put it. And it turned out it was because it was older. It just couldn't handle the specs of my project, and I ended up having to resell it. I turned right around and sold it on eBay and had to buy another one. So you just have to be careful that it actually meets your needs if it's a little older. Obviously it can be the cheapest way to go about it, but you'd have to depend. Like anything, I guess there's no one answer to that. I have been burned, but I would certainly take the risk if the cost difference was great enough.
Mm-hmm. And one question from Carol: could you get a sponsor for the equipment? And I think that, Carol, the best answer would be you can get a sponsor for anything. That's up to you, I guess, right, Ryan?
Oh yeah, my record. Not being a fundraiser by nature, I don't know a ton about it. What I did know was I know the type of equipment I will need for this display. So those are the candidates. Who makes that sort of thing. Try them all. Like I needed high-end graphics cards. There's 2 or 3 companies that do that. I sent emails to all of them. Why not? Only one responded, but I only needed one. So from my perspective, your candidates there are people who make things you need. They appreciate having their name on your display as much as you appreciate having free stuff. So it can be hard to get a hold of the right person and all that, and they may just say no, but that is a good population to start with.
Right. Okay, we'll do a couple more quick questions here. Quickly for Joanne, yes, the webinar will be available online. I'll give you more information on that in a second. And from Alyssa, what's the timeline been for each of these projects that you've shown us?
It varies, and a lot of it was I took extra time when I had it. So like the underwater thing was almost a year, partly though because we started as a student project, so we weren't necessarily on it full time. And then for a while I was doing it as I was calling that an internship and continuing to work on it. So that was a year, but that was a special exception. The ship simulator took, I believe it was about 3 months really, but then, that gave us opportunity later. We just kept adding to it. So that whole thing took another year and a half or something in total, but in reality, it was 3 months. And then the 3D model touchscreen thing that I'm doing, I've had more time, so I use it, but that could have been done in a month or so.
Okay. Really quick, have you ever done any work in Eastern Canada?
I should, but the funny line that I always deliver when people ask me about what I do, I'm not one to make grandiose claims, so I just make my claims so finely honed that they must be true. So I say that I am the finest producer and designer of maritime-related exhibits in all of Western Canada. So I would love to change that up to all of Canada, or at least the Pacific Northwest or something. But I have not yet done so.
Yeah,
So far, I'm only in BC.
Lisa, shoot Ryan an email and we can maybe change that. Another quick question, maybe we'll do 2 more. So this one's from Michelle. Have you ever designed something for adults with kids being the secondary audience? And if so, are there any major points to consider?
No, I guess not for any reason. I focus this presentation on kids, but that's only because that tends to be the main point. But no, it has never happened that I've done things for adults only. I almost wouldn't, because anything, as I'm saying, built things in layers. I would almost want anything to have a child appeal, but no, I haven't. So I'm not sure what would be different there. Sorry.
Okay, and maybe the final question, because we're just at 10 after 1, so thanks to everybody for sticking around, but this one comes in from Anna. For equipment donations, have you had more luck asking for donations with smaller stores and institutions, or from larger corporations like the producers themselves?
I've only solicited from the manufacturers. I as the construction worker don't typically go around trying to solicit donations, so I actually don't know a super ton about it except what I personally did, which was to work with my own suppliers, basically.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you very much to Ryan for your presentation, and I hope that everybody here has enjoyed it. I know we still have quite a few people hanging on the last few minutes here. If you do have any questions, please feel free to shoot me an email. I can forward them on to Ryan, and Ryan has provided that handout, which I'm going to be sending around a little bit later on as well. We are actually done the webinars for 2017, so thank you to Ryan for finishing on a bang. We will be doing them again starting in January, so mark your calendar, January 16. If you want to present one, now is your chance. We have a host your own webinar form on our website, and I'm going to send that link around as well. We're really interested in getting people like Ryan coming in, people who have a good skill or a good experience to share with the community. And as you can see, it's not just BC, it's all across Canada, and we hope to keep expanding that. So if you do have something you want to share, or maybe you know somebody who would like to share something, feel free to get in touch. You can find it under the professional development tab if you go to our website, but like I said, I'll be sending that out shortly as well. And for those of you that asked if there's a recording, there will be one. It takes a couple hours to get it up onto YouTube, but that will be sent around with a password as well. And along with that, the one final thing that's being sent around is a little bit of a follow-up survey. We have taken surveys from each webinar so far this year, and it's just a great way for us to make sure that we are providing a good service, providing a good program. If there are any challenges, tech problems, etc., this is a good opportunity for you to give us that feedback, as well as give us ideas for topics for the future. We'd love to hear from you, so that's going to be in that email as well. I swear it's not going to be that long of an email, but please fill that out. It should be open for a week. It really helps us plan for the future. So, like I said, mark your calendar for January 16th, and we will see you then. Thank you very much to Ryan. And if anybody has any other questions for him, forward them on to me and I'll pass them on. So everybody have a happy new year. Thanks for joining us through 2017, and we will see you next year. Thanks, Ryan.